think that we're going to pass the floor to our next guest, whom I had already kind of announced. So welcome back, Morag. So Morag is the head of the English unit at DG SCIC. So that's the European Commission booths. And Morag's here to tell you about this particular and very exciting field in which interpreters work and how to become one of them.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Fanny, for that introduction and for inviting me to come along and speak to you today. Just by way of introduction, I'm myself from Edinburgh, unfortunately not tuning in from Scotland today, but I started out by studying both French and Italian at school and went on to do French and Italian at university, and then did a postgraduate qualification to become a conference interpreter. And I've been out in Brussels now for 27 years. I was originally going for 5 months to do a traineeship, and I'm still here. But anyway, yes, I'm here representing DG SCIC, which is the biggest conference interpreting service in the world. And the English unit within that conference interpreting service is the largest unit. We interpret the 24 official languages of the EU, but we also interpret many other languages as well, such as Chinese, Arabic, Japanese, now a lot of Ukrainian. So basically a very wide range of languages. And we also have international sign. I know there were questions about sign language as well. We have a very large staff of roughly 750 people, and we have more than 3,000 accredited interpreters. And just last year alone, we had over 50,000 contract days, just to give you an idea of the magnitude. So pretty much every day in Brussels, we have about 50 meetings happening with interpretation. So it's a huge logistical enterprise to cover all of the different language needs and the different configurations in each and every meeting. So SCIC is a commission service, but actually about 75–80% of our work is for the Council of Ministers and for the European Council, so the summits. But we also work for the Commission, for the Committee of the Regions, the Economic and Social Committee, and various other agencies and bodies. I think, you know, the main question here is how do you become an interpreter with us, and what skills is it that we're looking for in an interpreter? Well, essentially, the first thing you need is obviously to have a qualification as a conference interpreter. And this can either be, for example, the Heriot Watt 4-year undergraduate course, or you need to have a master's or a postgraduate qualification in conference interpreting. For the English booth, our basic profile is obviously an English mother tongue, and then either French or German plus one other EU language. I think one of the misconceptions often is that, you know, you have to be bilingual in order to work as an interpreter, an absolutely brilliant linguist and speak your languages perfectly. That is not the case at all. In fact, the most important language you have is your mother tongue. So it's how well you communicate in your mother tongue, and the rest is the passive knowledge, but how you get that passive knowledge across into your mother tongue. Obviously, we're looking for people who are good communicators, because you're not just translating words, you're translating concepts, you're translating ideas. You're also acting as a cultural interface. So it's not just being a walking dictionary and knowing all the technical terminology, but it's also conveying the whole spirit of the message in the languages that you have. So I think it's very important to have spent time in the countries of your language, to have really immersed yourself in the culture, because that is so much of what the job is about. I think another big area that is incredibly important for us is people's general knowledge. You have to be curious about the world. You have to want to understand how it works, the geopolitics, the way countries interact with each other. You have to be up to speed on current affairs and European affairs. You don't need to be a walking glossary of customs terminology or agricultural terminology, but if you have a basic understanding of where things grow, how things work, how a parcel is sent from one country to the next, how goods are shipped around the world. It's that general understanding that then enables you for a specific meeting with a specific glossary to then cope with whatever subject comes up at work. So it's that really broad general knowledge that gives you the basis. You have to obviously be somebody who doesn't want a 9-to-5 job. We work irregular hours, our programme changes every day. I don't know currently what time I'm going to be working tomorrow. It's the European Summit, hoping to see Mr. Zelensky in person, and I have no idea what time this is all going to happen. So, you know, I have to be available all day, all evening, possibly all night tomorrow, and the same thing the day after. So you have to have that flexibility, which not everybody wants. People want to have routine, they need to know, to be able to plan, etc. You don't get that with interpreting. Having said that, the vast majority of meetings are a standard 10 till 6, but you know, you have to be prepared to work outside the regular office hours. I think a love of travel is another thing which is very important. We do, especially in the English booth, we do end up travelling a lot, usually to the country of the presidency, but we've also got you know, missions going on across the world. The other skills, I mean, a lot of the previous speakers have touched on these, you know, resilience, stress management, versatility. I mean, those are all very, very important. Punctuality, being well prepared, and a passion for lifelong learning, because every day you're learning something new. I've been doing this job for 27 years and I'm still not bored of it. Every day is different, and I think that's what's so rewarding, working as an interpreter. So yeah, I mentioned what you needed, the basic requirements to be an interpreter, but as to actually how you get into interpreting, once you have the qualification, once you have the requisite languages, then the first step is usually to become an accredited freelance interpreter. We do have staff posts, but people normally start out as a freelance and then they are taken on as a temporary member of staff, and then we usually organise an internal competition for people to become permanent staff. So if you have the necessary qualifications, I can already tell you that the deadline for applications this year is the 5th of May. And I think, Fanny, you're going to share the website where you can find out more information. There are 2 parts to our tests. So we first of all have a remote part, which is the simultaneous test, and that's done on an online platform. And I think for English this year, that's probably going to happen in July. And then the marking will happen over the summer, and the consecutive part will be at the end of October. What we've done this year is we've introduced a new possibility. So for candidates who get through the simultaneous part and who are invited to the sorry, is my image is still there. My computer's doing funny things. My docking station just went.
We can still see you.
You can still see me, that's okay. I just lost my screen for a minute. Yeah, I was saying we have introduced a possibility this year of resits. So anybody who gets through to the consecutive stage, if they fail one or either of the consecutive tests, then there's a possibility 2 months later to do a resit. So I think this is a great opportunity that we've now introduced. And then if you're successful in the accreditation test, then you get put on what is known as the common list, which means you can be recruited not just by us, not just by SCIC, but also by the European Parliament and the Court of Justice. Some very interesting things have been said here, especially by the recent graduates. It's really important when you start out that you're open to take on whatever work comes your way, and to not put all your eggs in one basket. I think people sort of think, I have finished my qualification, I want to go and work for the EU, that's the be all and end all. And it doesn't work like that, not for the vast majority of people. When I myself finished my postgraduate qualification, there was absolutely no way that I would have passed an accreditation test. And I got the advice at the time, you know, go off and get a bit of translation experience, go and see whether you can get yourself a traineeship, for example, in the European Parliament or the Commission, and take on whatever voluntary work you can get, and just build up your experience, your language skills and all the rest of it. And that's exactly what I did. I went off and I did a couple of traineeships at the European Parliament in Luxembourg. Then I got a translation traineeship in Brussels at the European Commission. I took on a little bit of freelance translation work on the private market. I did a bit of voluntary work in the booth. And then I found a job working for a small organisation where they needed somebody to do a bit of in-house translation and interpreting. And it was only 3 years later that the opportunity came up to sit a competition and to join the staff at the Commission. So I always, you know, I always really make that point that, you know, you should seize whatever opportunity you get to reinforce your skills and to reinforce your language knowledge. And you certainly shouldn't be put off by failing an accreditation test. It's you know, if you think in the vast majority of professions, you don't go into a top job the minute you've graduated. If you whatever you've studied, you will build your way up to that. And I think, you know, a lot of people, they do the accreditation test, they fail, and then that's it. I'll never be an interpreter for the EU institutions. And I think that's really a shame, because you just need to build up that experience. And most people are successful when they come back a second or third time. What can we offer in terms of support? Maybe I could just say a few words about that very briefly. We do have student bursaries, but of course now with Brexit, this is something which is slightly more restrictive for Brits, in that you do have to have an EU nationality in order to be eligible. And the amounts at the moment, if you do have an EU nationality, if you're studying in an EU country, then the bursary is €2,400. If you're studying in another country, so for instance, if you were to do a course at Heriot Watt with an EU nationality, it would be €1,600 a year. And again, that information you can find on the website that Fanny has shared. We have a new possibility this year of a Blue Book traineeship for interpreting. Very limited number of places, and it's really a pilot project, but that's open to all nationalities. So UK nationals can apply for that. I think the deadline's just passed for the October traineeship, so just keep an eye out if you are interested, and there'll be a possibility again later on in the year to apply for next year's traineeship. Well, that's a 5-month paid traineeship by the European Commission. The only condition there is that you have to have an interpreting qualification. So you can't come and do an interpreting traineeship with us unless you are qualified. There are other types of traineeships you can do, including in DG SCIC, but you know, if you want to do the interpreting one, then you have to have the qualification. If you do an interpreting course such as Heriot Watt, then you can also come on a study visit for a couple of days to Brussels, which can be really interesting. And now this year they're back in person rather than online. So I'm really looking forward to welcoming the students from this year's cohort. You can also contact me directly if you're interested in doing some shadowing, if you want to find out more about interpreting, or if you're already qualified and you want to come and experience what it's like working with us. I'm quite happy to set up a day or two of dummy booth experience. So all you need to do is send me an email, and again, I'm assuming that my contact details will be made available after this. And then for anybody who does pass our accreditation test, we also have a newcomers scheme. And the great advantage with that, especially now, I think for UK nationals, is that you have a guaranteed 100 days spread over the first 18 months. It's not exclusive, so you can go and work for other employers, but you have those guaranteed 100 days. And from my experience so far since the start of the year, that is enough for the Belgian authorities to be giving out work permits and residence permits. So if you want to be able to come to Brussels and base yourself in Brussels, it's a really good scheme. And of course, 100 days, that's really a significant amount of money over the first 18 months. But then you can supplement that with other work, whether that be translation or interpreting. The only condition for that, as I say, no nationality restrictions, but you do have to come and live in Brussels. But there are worse places to have to live, so you know. And it's a good way of networking, really a very good way of networking. You start out, we have a whole mentoring scheme, so you get paired up with a staff colleague who's there to support you. You get to join in the whole social life of the unit, so it's really a great way to start out in your career. So I don't know, I had to get through that all quite quickly. I hope I've covered all of the main points, but of course I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Indeed. Well, there was a question that was quite interesting, and I'm sure you'll have a clear answer for that. It's the opportunities for interpreters who have a non-EU language. The person who asked the question mentioned Arabic, because you did mention a number of non-EU languages and the need for them. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I have to say that's not my area of expertise, but again, if you look on the website which you've shared, Fanny, then you can find out a little bit more information. There's ad hoc accreditation of interpreters with Arabic. But yeah, I don't have the details as to when those tests are organised. Obviously, Arabic is used very regularly at the UN, but for us, it's just, you know, yeah, I suppose it is quite frequent, but then we work with freelance colleagues. We don't have anybody in-house with Arabic.
Yes, that's the pattern, isn't it? You have a number of in-house interpreters and then a larger pool of accredited EU interpreters.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think pre-COVID, we were at a ratio of about 50-50. So half the work was done by staff interpreters, half the work was done by freelancers. That obviously changed quite radically when the pandemic hit, because the work dried up for freelance interpreters. And that's why I made my point there about not putting all your eggs in one basket, because, you know, some people were stung really badly. And now last year, I think we got to sort of maybe 55% of the work was done by staff, 45% by freelance. So the balance, I mean, obviously the first part of the year we were still emerging from the COVID pandemic, so work hadn't picked up fully. But I think this year is going to be an incredibly busy year. And then these things are always slightly cyclical. Next year we have, you know, the Parliament elections, the European Parliament elections. So work kind of grinds to a halt there for a few months, and then it'll pick up again. So, you know, that's again another reason for not putting all your eggs in one basket. But yeah, we work with, as I said, over 3,000 freelance interpreters. What I didn't say is that, I mean, at the moment, we have a real shortage of English booth interpreters, to such an extent that meetings are being cancelled because we can't provide an English booth. Not because we can't provide the other languages, but we cannot fill the English booth. So it has a knock-on effect on all the other languages. I think a combination of the age pyramid. We have a lot of people who came in the 1970s when the UK and Ireland joined. They have all retired now, and that's both the staff and freelance population. There is just a huge demand for native English speakers. We're in direct competition with the other institutions, but also with the UN and the private market. So it's really, I mean, starting out as a freelance these days in the English booth, it's a great time to be starting out.
We've also got a question about training programs you might recommend for people who want to reinforce their skills, in particular for simultaneous interpreting. So I don't know if it's someone who's already had an initial training, maybe not worked so much and wants to get back into it, or what kind of profile it is, but
There are practice groups out there. I don't personally have the details here, but I know that there's, for example, there's a Brussels practice group, but there's an awful lot online where you can work together with others. One thing you can usefully do is go on to the public speech repository that we have. There's a lot of material on there. And a lot of our sessions are public. I mean, all the work of the European Parliament is available on the EP website. We have public sessions of ministerial councils and so on, so you can go on and you can practice with that material. You can join the Knowledge Centre for Interpretation, and we've got various mock conferences that we've organised over the last couple of years, where again you can go in and you can use that material, you can practice with that material. So there's a lot of material out there. And then, as I say, I think there are practice groups where you can pair up with other people.
And Heriot Watt and other well-established universities with interpreting programs tend to run summer schools or intensive interpreting courses, so it's worth checking as well. There's also a question, regarding the assessment criteria for the interpreting exams. I think that's covered in great detail in the links that you provided and that I posted, but more generally, what do you look for in a candidate when assessing someone who would meet the entry requirements for the test and then go through the test? What's the profile that is likely to succeed?
Well, I think, you know, we test both simultaneous and consecutive, and for different reasons. I think what we're looking for is obviously somebody who's capable of demonstrating their analytical skills, critical thinking, analytical skills, the communication skills, so how they present especially in consecutive, but, you know, in simultaneous, we're looking for somebody who can modulate their voice well, nice intonation, a pleasant delivery. If somebody's got to listen to them all day, they do not want to be monotonous, you know, or have an unpleasant way of delivering, very staccato or something like that. So we're looking for a smooth, pleasant delivery. It does not have to be perfect. I'm not saying that we're just looking for potential, because obviously the difficulty for us is that the minute you're accredited, you can be assigned to any meeting. And because we have so many meetings going on every day, we have very little control over who's assigned where. You're not going to end up in the summit, but, you know, you could end up in a meeting with commissioners or ministers on day one of your work. And the English booth in particular is in the firing line, because everybody's listening to the English. It could be being web streamed. Journalists could be using it as a basis to go out on the news. So we're very much under scrutiny, and we have to be pretty sure that the person knows their languages well. So they're demonstrating a solid understanding of the language and demonstrating the analytical skills. And that's where, as I say, also people often fall down in their general knowledge, their knowledge of European affairs. As I say, you're never going to get a speech in a test situation which requires you to know the ins and outs of the common agricultural policy, but you have to know that there's a common agricultural policy. You have to have a vague idea of how that works, because obviously for each and every meeting you can prepare, you get documents. We have an online database. You get your program, you can click on a link, you get the documents for the meeting. So you can do all of that specific terminology work. But in the test situation, anything can be thrown at you, and that's really testing your general knowledge and your general understanding of how the EU works. So yeah, that's essentially what we're looking for. We have a system which is quite interesting of a pure customer. So in all our tests, we always have one person who does not listen to the original. They only listen to the output of the candidate. And it's really important that we have that person to see, is this a clear and coherent message? Can I follow this speech? Does it have a logic to it? So we're checking kind of the internal logic and reasoning that's going on and analysis. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, I think. There was also a question just clarifying the requirements for someone interested in the accreditation test for the English booth. So a question from someone who's studying French and German and who's wondering whether they would be eligible with English A and French and German as passive languages, or whether they would need to add another language, another EU language.
Yeah, no, that is our, in fact, that is our preferred profile. So that's really the best profile that we're looking for. Somebody who's got French and German. It's the most useful. But quite honestly, we'll take any profile that has either French or German plus one other EU language. The reason I say it's our preferred profile is just because the working languages of the Commission are English, French and German. So if you have a combination of French and German into English, you can be assigned to any meeting. Whereas, if you have, say, French and Spanish, that's still useful, and especially in a bigger language regime, then that's useful. But French and German, this is, as I say, the ideal combination to have.
Fantastic. I think that it answers the question very clearly. One last question. Someone asking, is it important to be a native speaker, or is it possible for the non-native speaker to work into other languages? And I think that there's a very clear answer for that for the EU.
So yeah, it sorry, excuse me. It's possible to work into another language. We do have people with a very, very high level of English who are not native speakers, but it's fairly rare. So if you want to work a full English booth, then you tend to be a native speaker. But as I say, there's the odd exception out there. Through their upbringing, where they've lived, they've got a very, very high standard. But what we do use a lot are people who work with a B language. So in particular, that's something that we use for, say, the Baltic languages, where we don't have anybody in the English booth who can interpret Latvian into English as a native English speaker. So all the Latvian comes from the Latvian booth. They interpret back into English or French or German, but mostly into English. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly room for people to work bilingually, bidirectional. But on the whole, in our meetings, because we're talking big language regimes, people tend to work into their mother tongue.
Thank you very much. I think there was a last question regarding the use of Turkish and the eligibility, but if I understood correctly your answer for other specific languages, it's best to look at the EU website and look for the ad hoc accreditation tests for non-EU languages, and they will have all the information regarding the eligibility, the criteria, dates and assessment, etc. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, indeed. It's the information should be out there. There'll be ad hoc accreditation from time to time.
And there's a question about someone who has English as a native language, and they need well, just to clarify the question asked by Florence, obviously there is a unit for each EU language. So if you're a native speaker of French, look at the language profile that the French booth is looking for instance, and it might not be the same as for the English booth. There might be more need for a retour, as you were describing in the Latvian booth, or there might be need for more or less C languages depending on the language. Regarding non-EU languages, there's questions for other Indian languages. Again, I think that it's worth looking at the website. There might be accreditation tests for non-EU languages coming up, but not as regularly as for EU languages. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I was just thinking, I see Pashto and Urdu there. I have got an Indian colleague who works in the English booth and who does a couple of the Indian languages into English as well. So there is a certain demand for Hindi and things like that, but not specifically.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for your time, Morag. It was a pleasure welcoming you virtually, and I look forward to seeing you in Brussels in June, as I'm the lucky one who will be accompanying our students for the site visit. Very much looking forward to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.